In today's video, we build a lid out of plywood for my new 20-gallon fish tank, and then a fight breaks out amongst two of my take-tail inhabitants, and one of my fish loses his tail. Hello and welcome to Tank Tales, a beginner's guide to aquariums, aquaponics, and fish tank fun. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button so you're notified each and every time I publish a new video. In last week's episode of Tank Tales, I transferred all of my live plants and all of my adult fish from two separate 10-gallon fish tanks into a single, much larger 20-gallon aquarium. All seemed well inside my new 20-gallon glass aquarium until my smallest Golden Wonder killifish suddenly went missing. After minutes of searching, I finally found the little guy on my kitchen floor, several feet away from the aquarium that had become his new home. He had jumped several inches out of the water, up over the lid, bounced across the counter and the kitchen floor, and was ultimately killed when I accidentally stepped on him as I was going about my day. I didn't want any of my other fish to perish in the same way, so I knew I had to put a lid on my 20-gallon aquarium as soon as possible. Before coming up with a more permanent solution to my lid problem, I used a roll of aluminum foil to cover the top of the 20-gallon glass aquarium. I figured the aluminum would be strong enough to prevent my fish from jumping out of the tank, but I worried that the reflective nature of the foil might frighten my little aquatic animals, so I knew I needed to come up with a better solution fast. I looked online for a 20-gallon tank lid that I could buy, but they were surprisingly more expensive than I thought they would be. I searched my local Facebook Marketplace for a 20-gallon fish tank lid as well, but there were none to be had in my area. So I came up with the idea of simply making the fish tank lid myself out of a scrap piece of wood. I had just recently finished renovating my old condo, so I had several pieces of plywood laying around in my basement. I grabbed one of these pieces of wood, along with my electric saw, and in a matter of minutes had produced what appeared to be a nearly professional level lid for my home aquarium. I threw the new wooden lid on top of my aquarium, and to my surprise, it fit like a glove. The filter fit perfectly in the hole I'd cut out for it at the back of the tank, and the LED light was positioned perfectly in the hole I had cut out in the middle of the board. I thought it was a genius to have solved my lack of a lid problem so quickly, and without having to spend even a single dollar because the wood was left over from a previous project and therefore free. But after just 24 hours of my wooden tank lid being in place, I quickly realized why fish tank lids are not made out of wood. Moisture. After a little more than a day, my perfectly straight wooden fish tank lid was starting to bend. The water and condensation inside the tank was building up on the roof of the wooden lid and causing the board to bend upwards at its edges. I wasn't so concerned about the bending of the wooden lid at first, but a few days later I noticed that the lid had another, much bigger problem: mold. In addition to the water inside the tank causing the wooden lid to bend upward, tiny spores of mold were starting to grow on every inch of the board's bottom. From the top, my free fish tank lid looked like a good solution to my fish potentially jumping to their deaths from inside the tank. But from the underside, it was clear that wood was not an ideal material to be used in the construction of a fish tank lid. I needed to come up with a better solution. So once again, I headed to my basement and found a large flat piece of plastic that had been given to me by a friend. This large piece of plastic was used as a sidewall in my friend's camper van, but she was no longer using it, and as I'm somewhat of a cheapskate and don't like throwing things away, I asked my friend if I could keep her unwanted plastic sidewall in the event that I came up with a use for it at some point in the future. So now, with wood being an obviously bad building material for my fish tank lid, I thought I'd give my lid making construction skills another try, but this time with a big piece of plastic. Just like I had done before with the wooden sheet of plywood, I measured the top of the fish tank and then created a template of sorts for the fish tank lid I wanted to create on top of the plastic sheeting. Once I was happy with my design, I broke out my skill saw and quickly went about cutting out version number 2 of my 20-gallon aquarium lid. This new plastic tank lid wasn't as strong or as sturdy as my original wood version, but as long as it kept my fish from jumping out of the tank and didn't harbor mold like the wooden tank lid had, I'd be happy with the change. The plastic fish tank lid fit like a glove, just like my wooden fish tank lid did. But the real test now was, would this new material, plastic, prevent the growth of mold? only time would tell. Now that my lid problem was solved, at least for the moment, there was a new issue happening inside my large kitchen counter aquarium. While all of my fish had gotten along just swimmingly inside their smaller 10-gallon fish tank, now that they were in a larger tank, there seemed to be something strange going on. One day, I woke up and noticed that all 3 of my Serpae tetra were cowering in fear in the right corner of the tank, near the water heater. At first, I thought maybe the fish were sick. They were just kind of sitting there after all, not swimming around the tank as they normally did. And seriously, I could almost sense a sort of fear in their eyes. The fear of death. I watched the tetra for several hours on and off, thinking that their odd behavior would pass, and they'd either return to their normal selves, or they'd simply perish. But after nearly a day of watching them cowering in fear in the corner of the tank and refusing to come up to the top of the aquarium to feed, I noticed that one of the tetra was missing almost all of its tail. At first, I thought maybe the tank had been overcome by algae or fungus, and my tetras were suffering from some kind of strange tail-eating bacteria which had infected one of my fish and would soon be infecting the others. But then I began to notice that my large golden wonder killifish was acting out of sorts as well. While he would normally be found swimming at the top of the large tank, he was now diving down deep into the water and staring ominously at the 3 orange tetras cowering in the corner of the aquarium. And again, at first I didn't think there was anything odd about this behavior. I figured that my tetras were possibly sick and dying, and my large killifish was diving down to simply check in on his 3 tank mates who were obviously scared and frightened. But then, all of a sudden, my killifish darted toward one of the tetras, causing him to quickly swim away. All 3 fish scattered. The tetra with no tail made a valiant attempt to escape and just barely made it out of the way before my large killifish ultimately retreated. It was then that it hit me. My magnificently large and now very single killifish was picking on my tetra. It was my killifish who had bitten off the tail of my tetra, not some strange waterborne bacteria that had been the cause of my tetra's tailless backside. Upon this realization, I quickly grabbed my little green fish net and began the speedy process of scooping my tetra out of their 20-gallon home. I needed to get them away from the killifish immediately. With nowhere else to put them at the moment, I decided the best thing to do was to temporarily house my 3 medium-sized tetra with the baby guppies, who up until this point in time had never shared a tank with any other breed of fish. I wasn't quite sure how my tetra or my guppies would react to suddenly being forced to share such a small tank with another breed of fish, but I had no other choice. I dropped my 3 orange tetra into the small 5-gallon aquarium with my 5 now adult male-sized guppies and waited. To my surprise, despite the tetra being at least 3 or 4 times the size of the male guppies, the tetra were more scared of the guppies than the guppies were scared of the tetra. Perhaps the shock of having your tail bitten off by a much larger fish was enough to frighten my tetra into thinking that almost any other type of fish might be out to get them. For hours I sat and watched as my tetra acclimated to their new and hopefully very temporary home. They spent a lot of time hiding and staying very still, but eventually they began to swim around the tank with a renewed sense of confidence. I was most fearful for my little tetra, who was now missing almost all of his tail. Now that he'd been removed from the dangerous tail-biting killifish, he was spending a lot of time hiding in his new tank and would only come out to feed. As for my golden wonder killifish, he was back to his old habits as well, swimming around the top of the tank, almost completely ignoring the 2 pandacori catfish swimming around on the bottom of the water column. If my killifish had been picking on the tetra and going so far as to bite off their tails, maybe this killifish was the reason my other killifish had died, and now he was the reason why my tetra had lost his tail and might soon die at some point in the future. This large yellow fish, now more than 7 or 8 centimeters in length, is my most beautiful, intelligent animal, but he's obviously one of my most dangerous pets. In next week's episode, I transfer my guppies and my tetras into 2 separate 10-gallon glass aquariums, and I resurrect my kitchen counter Guppy Castle Kingdom. Plus, I add 3 new creatures to my collection of kitchen counter aquariums. And now it's time for the Tank Tales question of the week. I've heard about fish sometimes nibbling on the tails of other fish, but I've never seen it for myself until now. Have you ever had one of your fish bite or remove the tail of another fish? And how did you solve this very dangerous dilemma? Leave a comment down below this video and let me know. Did you enjoy this video? I hope you did, and I can't wait for you to see next week's episode. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to smash that subscribe button and the bell icon now so you get notified each and every time I publish a new video. Also, don't forget to hit the like button. That really does a lot to help me out, and I appreciate your support very much. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you'll subscribe to my Tank Tales channel, as I plan on adding new videos like this one on a regular basis. And your support helps to ensure that I can make more videos like this one in the future.